Good evening all, I hope everyone's well. And thank you for coming tonight. We're here for the introduction to disability inclusion and hopefully relating it to athletics. So first of all, we're going to start with a couple of housekeeping rules. We've got Zoe is here for technical difficulties. So if you have any technical difficulties, please can you put it in the chat box. And we're also going to be taking questions at the end of the session. So if you have any questions which you think you want to ask throughout the session, if you put it in the questions box, and then at the end of the session, I will hopefully come up with a brilliant answer for you. Also, the hand up reaction is not working today as well. We're not going to use that today just because the questions come at the end of the session. So we'll hold everything back for then. Brilliant, right, we'll get started. So my name is Simon Jones. I work for Disability Sport Wales. I'm one of their tutors and one of the learning consultants. My role is to go around to run courses like this, run on webinars like this, and also to link with national governing bodies to help them become sort of more inclusive. So we're going to crack on today. So everything, course outcomes. So by the end of this sort of 30 minutes, hopefully you'll be able to apply inclusive practice into your sessions, as well as identify sources of reliable further information and guidance relevant to physical activity, including disability sport. So I think from my point of view, applying inclusive practice into your sessions is one of the most important parts of this course anyway, because it's just give you ideas, because I would say to people, most coaches and instructors, they are inclusive and they do it every single time they do a session because they have to change something for an individual in that session, whether they're disabled or not. But this is just kind of reaffirming and giving people a bit more knowledge about how to do it for disabled people. There's a little bit about Disability Sport Wales. So here's the contact details. We have 2 offices. We have one in Sport Wales National Centre. So if you go in on the ground floor, and it's quite near the gym. So just down there, so that's one of our main offices, and we've also got D-Side, a leisure centre up in North Wales as well. So we're based in 2 places throughout Wales, and contact details are both there. If you want to get hold of us, please ring us. We're happy to help. We've also got an officer in every single authority as well. So I'll show you a bit about that now. So this is what Disability Sport Wales can offer. So we have a community team. That's, as you said there, 22 Disability Sport Wales development officers. So that's one in every single authority throughout Wales. So your first point of call will be sort of Welsh Athletics. But if you're looking to help some more sort of in-depth support as well about disability, feel free to contact your Disability Sport Wales development officer. Most of them are based within the local authority, so they're based with the council. Some are based in trusts, and I think Sport Cardiff are based in Cardiff Met University. So we are around, and every single one of those will have a development officer who can help you and come out to your club, give you advice, give you tips on equipment. There's lots of, I'd say use them and abuse them. That's the best way to get hold of them, really, because they will happily do anything you want them to do. Education and training team. Development of inclusive coach education and opportunities associated with disability equality. So again, we've got a team of about 20 tutors throughout Wales, and we run, before the lockdown, we ran face-to-face courses right the way throughout Wales, and now we're sort of moving to online learning as well. So hopefully some more courses will come out from Disability Sport Wales. You've got the pathway and performance team. So you've got a national performance manager. This has probably changed since I've done these slides. And you've also got the 2 national performance pathway officers. So these guys look after the athletes who are showing interest in performing, going through the pathway, and the more talented athletes as well. But again, they're very, very good at what they do, and they look at the individual as a whole. They won't try and push them into an activity. They'll find out what suits that individual best and what they're more talented at, really. And they'll go to sort of hubs throughout the year where they can practice some skills, and then they can go on and try and specialize in a sport later on. You've got InSport. So again, InSport is an accreditation scheme which is aimed at sport clubs, national governing bodies, what else have we got there as well? Local authorities, and there's also a third sector one as well. So we're trying to get people to be more inclusive, and the accreditation, there is a criteria which people have to hit. So sport clubs have to hit it, national governing bodies have to hit a separate one, and it's all about trying to get an inclusive mindset. So you're thinking about inclusion from the off. It's not more of like a bolt-on. You think, actually, you've got a disabled person coming now, we'll have to try and change things. Hopefully when that person comes, you've got everything in place. And you've also got the Go Out Get Active team as well. So they're based in Pembrokeshire, RCT and Wrexham. So important parts now. This is the way that we like to think of sport, how we like to treat individuals in disability sport and in mainstream sport as well, is the functional approach. So consider the functional ability of any athlete which comes to your session. This is kind of based on basically what can they do, not what we want to focus on what can they do, not what they can't do. So this comes down to, again, almost like person-centered coaching. Find out information about that individual. So if they're a chair user, have they raced before? Do they need that extra support on the track? They may not. They may be they've been moved to the area and they're an elite wheelchair racer. I mean, may not need anything from yourselves. Just about helpfully having a track and a good training program. If they're visually impaired, what's their level of sight? If they come along to your session, they say, I'm a VI runner, have they run before? Do they need a guide? Yeah, I said, what can they see? That's what we want to know. All the information that helps you as a coach and get them involved in your club. Same with someone who's deaf, what's the best way to communicate with that individual? If they're doing a 400 meters, how do we try and get them to know, actually, we want to stop now? Little things like that. Have we got, with things like fire alarm, how do we know that we have to get hold of them before safely and to evacuate a building? So there's loads of little things we need to find out, and the best way to do that is to speak to the individual involved or their family, both engaged. So we get the information from them. They will give you the best information about themselves in order for you to coach them. I think some people are afraid to ask questions to people because they find it could be awkward. But from my point of view, when I've coached disability sport for nearly 15 years now. I will always ask an individual what I can do to make it better for them. And they will tell me, and they'll say, actually, I can't reach the floor on my left side, but I can reach the floor on my right side. So just little things like that can give you a much better idea from a coaching perspective. You want to assess the impact of this on their chosen sport and activity. So especially in athletics, I think with the Paralympics, there's certain events are catered for in the Paralympics. So if somebody's got a talent at running, for example, they're a runner with a learning disability, what categories and what events can they go into? Because I know it's limited compared to other impairment groups. So they could be training for the 800 meters, where the 800 meters is not actually a Paralympics event, but then the 1500 meters is. So they could be more to try and push them towards those events if they want to go into the elite sports side of it. You've also got to think that how an environment affects a person's functional ability. Again, this can come down to access. So athletic stadiums, think about if a chair user came along, could they get onto the track safely? Again, if somebody who's visually impaired came along, are there certain signage or certain arrows or anything, or can somebody be there to guide them? It's all about trying to find out how that person learns. And so it's not all about, you may not be able to cater for every single need of that individual, but as long as you speak to that individual and show that you're willing to cater for them and you want to cater for that person, they will have a much, much better experience in your club. And they'll think, actually, yes, I want to come back to this session. They really take an interest in myself. They know they can't cater for everything, but they're working on it and they're going to hopefully cater for me in the future. I think that's really important stuff there. You also got to think about the cold. In Britain, we're not blessed with sunshine all year round. Like for 11 months, to be honest. But yeah, so you got to think about if you're training in the winter, can the cold affect certain athletes and their impairment more than other athletes? I know we've got a disability athletics club in the Vale, and they train indoors in the winter. They move off the track session, so they become a separate satellite session, and they go indoors and train, just because for that group of people, it's best for them. It's all about what suits them best, and they decide we want to go indoors because in the winter it's freezing, we're not getting much out of it, we're not enjoying it, so we're going to go indoors. They go into the community hall. And look at what other factors impinge on a person's ability to participate. So you got to think, is there anything in your club which you think actually that could stop somebody taking part in or come into my athletic session? And he says, not for you to correct everything, because it's not a perfect world. You can't correct everything, but you can make a start on it. And you can also contact your local Welsh Athletics Development Officer or your Disability Sport Wales Development Officer, and they can give you advice on what to do. So if it's lacking equipment, for example, I know we haven't got an endless amount of equipment at Disability Sport Wales, but there could be somebody who could lend you something. And that could get that one individual taking part in your club, and then they have a really good experience with you. Okay, moving on to what is inclusion. So a little definition: inclusion is creating a meaningful opportunity to engage in sport. And there's loads of different types. Inclusion isn't just everybody in the same environment doing the same thing and everyone having a wonderful time. In a perfect world, that's brilliant, but there's different levels of inclusion. So we're going to go into those in a second. But first of all, I'm going to show you a little slide there. So it says equality and equity. So on the left-hand side, you've got equality, which is superb. in the end game, treating everybody or giving everybody the same opportunity. So again, if you look there, everyone's got one box, trying to look over a fence to, I think it's a baseball game, but only 2 out of the 3 people can see. On the right-hand side, we've got equity, which is sort of one of the themes that we try to go down. And if you notice, everybody in that group has been treated differently, but it suits their needs. So there's nothing wrong with treating people differently if you're making it fair, and everybody has different needs. I know from a coaching perspective, even if you coach a mainstream club with no disabled athletes in that club, every single person in that group will have a different need. And you, as a coach, you've catered for that need. So exactly the same with disability. You think, how can I cater for their needs? They may have something different that they need help with, but hopefully we can provide that or work to provide it. And that's what equity is. So hopefully that'll give you a nice insight into that. Go back to inclusion. So we've got the models of inclusion. This is where we identify techniques for good inclusive practice. So that is the model of inclusion. It looks a little bit complicated, but when we break it down, it is very, very simple. In the middle, you have the participant. That is the most important part of inclusion. They're as you said, person-centered coaching. That's the individual we want to include in our session and want them to have a very good experience. If you look around the outside, you've got sort of 4 little arrows pointing out. One saying open, one saying parallel, modified, and specific. Those are the different types of inclusion. If you look there, you've got many different types, and then you've got the sort of the blue ring going around it as well. Those things impact on those, on what decision you make is best for that individual and which setting they go into. So I will go into now. I'll give you a picture, an example of a picture, so I'll help you out. Open activity. This is which requires no alteration. So that individual in that picture, in all fairness, I don't actually know that individual's impairment, but it's deemed best that they go to an open activity with no alteration. So it could be a mainstream athletics club. This gentleman could be a deaf sprinter, a VI sprinter, could have a learning disability, could have autism, and we don't know his actual impairment, but for him, it's best to go to an open setting. He may have been in mainstream education, had no support whatsoever in school, but he has an impairment. So for him, he wants to go train with his friends at an open setting, open club, and he doesn't need any alterations to take part. We've worked with that gentleman and to find out what he wants and what we can provide. And for him, the best form of activity is an open activity. And that's where the inclusion spectrum comes in. We're including that individual in the decision making. We're not saying you have to go to this session, or he's not telling us I want to go to this session. We're making a decision together to find out what's best for him. You've got a modified activity. So again, it uses adaptation and modification. So in this instance, you've got your guide runners in front of you. That's a modification. You said, okay, what do you need to take part? And they've said, oh, can I have a guide, please? And we're going to use a tether to basically when we run together. That's a slight modification, which in all fairness will cost athletics clubs no money really, because you could use anything for a tether, anything that individual feel comfortable with. And you've hopefully got some volunteers on site as well who could possibly be a guide runner for that individual. So that's a modified activity, and they could take part in technically an open session, but they've modified it for that individual, and they could run with everybody else. I think another example of a modification, it could be the 2 lanes for a VI runner. They may have 2 lanes rather than 1. That's something, again, slight modifications, and I said most modifications will not cost you any money. It's all about trying to find, it's normally the simplest solution is the best solution, and that's what we always try and go for. So go with that. Parallel activity, so it says using differentiation. This could be grouping by ability. If you notice in this picture on screen, you've got some wheelchair racers at the front, and behind them you've actually got runners. But if it's a wheelchair marathon, if it's a marathon, wheelchair users are actually elite-wise faster than runners. So put them at the front, they can go off absolutely fine, and then there's no danger of collisions then, because they're actually faster than the runners, so they're in front and actually go on their way, and they can race to a very competitive level. It depends what you want to do. If you do this in a session, there's no harm in grouping people by ability in a session, because again, they can race against people of similar ability, and they can maybe get more out of it. They can push themselves. But again, this is all about, I wouldn't go to parallel all the time for certain individuals, because they may want to take part with other people as well. So about trying to find out when does this fit in best with what you do in your session. And then finally, you got a specific activity. This can be your wheelchair racers, your visually impaired runners. Just it's more about a specific group. So you'd always have somebody, it'd be a disability sport group, for example. So People may think that's not inclusive, but for that individual, they may get the most out of going to a specific activity. I know we've got again, we go back to the disability sport group in the Barry and Vale Harriers. For those individuals, they get the most from going to that disability group. And for them, they said, actually, I don't want to go to the mainstream club. I want to go to this group because it suits me a lot better. I feel much more comfortable here. My ability is catered for much better. And there's more people who understand what I need. And that's absolutely fine. And that's still a level of inclusion because they're still part of that athletics club, but they're a specific session. And in the summer, they go out and they go on the track and they will train on the same setting as everybody else, but there will be a separate group within themselves. And for those individuals, that's what suits them best. And so if I go back to the first bit there, as you see, you've got there, participant in the middle. That is, again, I'll reiterate, that's the most important part of this. That's where I said firing questions at people, asking questions, see what they can do, see what they can't do, or actually no, what they can do, and seeing what suits them best. If you notice around there, you've got the setting, activity, impairment, and ability. All those 4 things will impact on what decision that participant will go into, as in will they go to open, parallel, modified, or specific. And again, it's down to you guys to work with that family and find out what suits them best. And we're on to the final bit now as well. So as well as the activity inclusion model, we use STEP to try and help or support coaches in adapting activities. So if you look, everyone loves an acronym. So it's broken down into space, task, equipment, and people. So space, how can we adapt the area that people are playing in? So again, this could be, we mentioned earlier about somebody who's visually impaired. Will they need 2 lanes? Will they need 1? If there's a wheelchair racer taking part in a session, have they got sufficient room on that track? Does everybody know they're taking part, and can they take part safely? Same with the stadium, access to that stadium. Is it safe to get into for every person? So they've got other groups using the track, and we also said, mentioned about could certain groups go indoors in winters? Will it benefit them more? Or even and that would help. They could take part much easier if there's a suitable space for those individuals. You've also got the task. So how can we adapt the basics of activity so everybody is taking part? This could be a simple way of changing the instruction, breaking an activity down. I think the sign of a very good coach is that you can regress an activity. I think everyone can progress an activity and make it harder. How can you think about trying to make it a little bit easier for an individual? And that would help somebody take part much better. They can get a bit of success and then they can progress onto something a bit harder. Got to think about the task. If you've got a long jump group and you do, for example, and a chair user sort of taking part, they can't take part in that jumping session. It could be a multi-skill session. They can't take part in that session. Instead of thinking, I've seen people in the past, they panic and go, right, they're a chair user, they can't jump. What are we going to do with them? So think about what ability they have. Going back to functional ability, what would suit that individual best? So for example, instead of doing a jump, you think actually they could do some form of explosive power. So if they are taking part in a race in wheelchair athletics, they're going to need that explosive power at the start of the race. So a jump is quite an explosive movement. Think, what could you do for individuals in a sports chair? Or actually, they could do their 1 push max. They could see how far they can get in 3 seconds. Anything that will benefit that individual. It's all about think about the skills they need to take part in what the event they are taking part in, and how you can improve that. Again, taking the task, guide runners, that's adapting the task. Thinking about actually that individual, I need to change this task up so they can take part. That individual's come to your club and you said, right, what can I do to make it easier for you to take part? And they've gone, can I have a guide, please? And you've gone, right, okay, no problem. We'll do our best to get you a guide, and you found one. And that is basically modifying the task so that individual can take part in your session. And yes, so those be taking the task. Equipment. What can we use so everybody can take part? So again, this is a huge range of stuff here we can use. I don't know if everybody's seen the club throw before. It's a Paralympic event, so it's almost like throwing like a bowling pin. It looks a bit like a bowling pin with a weight on the end. That is easier for an individual to grip from a throwing perspective than it would say be for a javelin or a discus. And that's an event in the Paralympics where they will throw it, they can either go over their head, they can go to the side, whatever movement suits them best. That's about changing the equipment. Thinking about it's called the colors of equipment as well. Could that help a person who's visually impaired? Can they see that bit of equipment and can they pick it up then? Think about the cones you're using. If you are using cones and it's called the color of an athletics track, if it's a sort of the red colored track, What color contrast goes against that red? If it's a blue track, does a white stand out, or another color which is completely different contrast? But again, that comes down to asking that athlete, what colors can you see best? And they may say, actually, against blue, I can see a luminous yellow best. So you get brilliant, or find some luminous yellow cones, put them down. You can see pink best, put some pink cones down. So about finding out what is best for that individual. You also got the tethers as well. That's classed as equipment. Again, that can help somebody take parts. You've also got size of equipment as well. If they're doing sort of a young, sort of, for example, under 10s athletic session where they're learning this sort of those skills or coordination skills of what equipment could be used to help them out. Could a larger javelin be used? That's in sort of a wider javelin, the grip. Could smaller hurdles be used? Little things like that, just to help that individual out. And finally, we've got people. So again, mentioned back going to equipment, use of a guide, this sort of with people as well. A use of a guide is thinking about what individual you've got in your group and how you can utilize them best. You've also got, for example, somebody clapping. I know with them visually impaired long jump, they have somebody at the end of the run, they can be making a noise so that person knows exactly where to run to. Little things like that about using the people you've got. Again, grouping the runners by similar ability. That could be going back to the parallel side of it. That could actually give an individual a lot more confidence if they're around people of similar ability to themselves, because they're not coming last in every single race. So that sometimes can be a problem with sort of inclusive races. If you want everybody to start at the same point, because ideally you don't want to put one person out miles in front because that sort of singles them out. How do you make that race sort of fair so they're not coming last every time? So these are the sort of questions we have to ask ourselves. If you put them into group ability bands, that way they can train with people of similar ability to themselves. And you're sort of making sure, if you are doing relays, making sure teams that are actually fair as well. It could be hard for somebody to take part if their team's always coming last. Mix the groups up a bit. So again, there's no one set way of doing this, I'm afraid. But it always comes down to almost sometimes trial and error, but it's also having that plan ready. So when individuals come to your club, you've got that plan ready to say, right, is this obviously little Johnny's coming along, he has cerebral palsy. In your book, you're like, right, okay, in your mind, you could panic, think, right, I've never coached anybody with cerebral palsy before. Or you get a little plan in place saying, actually, I've made a couple of notes. These are the questions I've got to ask this family or this individual, and that'll be the information I use now to take part, so they could take part in a session with myself and get the best possible experience. Then they'll come back the next week, and hopefully they'll stay with you for a very long time. So brilliant, right? That is the end of the webinar now. I hope I gave you some information. I may have talked very, very quickly throughout that, but I'm hoping you got something out of it. Now I will pass back over to Zoe and see if there's any questions that have been sort of asked.
Hello everyone, hope you've had a nice evening. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you had a good weekend. So first question we've got, Simon, is how do we find out who our development officers are?
For Disability Sport Wales, if you simple as go to Google in Disability Sport, if you go to Google, type in Disability Sport Wales, their website will pop up, and if you go onto there and go to the play section, you can search for your development officer in your local authority. So I think a map of Wales comes up, you can click on your authority, or there's a drop-down menu on the left-hand side so you can pick your own authority. And once you click on that, their contact details will come up, should be email address and contact number, so you can get hold of them that way.
Fantastic. So next question, how can we support more of our club coaches to be confident in delivering an inclusive offer?
I would say getting people to talk. So if you want coaches to be they're more confident, is get them to speak to other coaches who coached disability athletics. I said there's a wealth of experience out there. There's so many coaches who've been in an inclusive environment and used their information to get more people, so use their skills to get more disabled people involved. It's about trying to find those people within your club, getting them involved in the sessions, and actually you can have a little sort of 5-minute chat. I've seen you've got a runner in your group who maybe who has an artificial limb. I may have one coming to my session. Can you give me some tips on that? Also about bringing the families in as well. I think families are the best source of information you can have to give you that detailed sort of critique basically of their child or their partner, their individual, anybody. And I say utilize them as much as possible, get them involved and say fire questions at them, and hopefully get the best information from them.
Fantastic, thanks so much, Simon. So just the last question here. how can I be more inclusive when coaching an athlete with autistic spectrum disorder within an open session?
Right. Say autism again, there's no one set way to include somebody with autism. Each and every right, they're an individual in their own right. My advice would be for this one is, it comes back to almost when they first come to your session. I know in the Vale we have our play team use a thing called a helpful book, and in that helpful book there are lots of questions that are asking about the individual. So I know you get your registration form for your athletics club. It'll say, for example, name, date of birth, emergency contact number, anything else we need to know. That's brilliant, excellent information. But then you want that detailed information. So sometimes you can almost have a look at creating your own helpful book for individuals who come to your session. In there, you could say, what is your impairment? And they can say, oh, have you got an impairment? And they can say, yes, autism. And they say, brilliant, next question. What makes you happy? What makes you sad? What makes you anxious? If you are anxious, what can calm you down? These are really good sort of questions and detailed information, which I would advise to ask about every single member, not just the disabled ones. Because I think that information then, they come to your session, you read up on their form and it says, actually, for example, this lad has autism, he hates the number 9, or so that, for example, he doesn't like numbers. In your session then, you won't use numbers with that individual. Or, for example, they're hypersensitive to sound, they don't like whistles. So when you're coaching them, you can be like, right, okay, they don't like whistles. I'm not going to use my whistle. I'll go and speak to them and find out what's the best way to give them notification that we need to stop an activity. And it could be just giving them a warning so they can actually be prepared for that noise. And that's what you'll get from that helpful book. I say a good example I had in the Vale. I was coaching a young lady with autism. Her mum gave me 2 A4 pages about her daughter. So, the one part was, if she gets anxious, she'll start tearing a little piece of towel which is on her waist. And if you notice that, she needs to calm down. To calm her down, you take her into a quiet space, let her sort of relax, and you take her out of that environment. If that mum hadn't given me that information, I would not know how to deal with that situation, because I could have a guess, but she gave me detailed information about that individual, and that's what helped. And that person came back into that session then once they calmed down, and they could take part with everybody else. So I think that's sort of the route I would go down. Cool.
Super, thank you very much. That's everything as far as the questions is concerned this evening, Simon. Thank you very much for providing us with such great insights. It's been fantastic.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for having me.
So we'll catch up with Simon again in part 2 of the Introduction to Disability Inclusion in a couple of weeks, the 26th of August. So please come and join us again. If you want to register, go on to Welsh Athletics events page and click on the link. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye, Simon.
Bye.